AI agents need data to be useful, but do we have the right tools to get them access? OAuth seems like the way forward, but it was never a security protocol. Just handing it over to agents is a recipe for disaster.
You're listening to Defense in Depth.
Welcome to Defense in Depth. I'm David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO series and host of this episode. But joining me as my co-host, one of your favorites, it's Steve Zalewski. Steve, say hello to the audience.
Hello, audience.
That's it. It gets more emphatic each time.
There you go, okay? The enthusiasm just comes through, the passion.
Keeps pushing through. Our sponsor for today's episode is Material Security, a nice return sponsor of the CISO series. That means we're doing something correct, right? Detection and response for the cloud workspace is here. We're going to be actually talking about this very topic on today's episode, and let's get to that. Every organization has terabytes of dormant data sitting in mailboxes, 365, and Google Workspace that used to be a non-threatening concern. But now the business sees enormous value in AI, leveraging all of that data. But as you pointed out, Steve, in a post on LinkedIn, when we make that connection using just OAuth, it's like turning on a fire hose when you just want a glass of water. So is this an AI problem or an old problem that AI is forcing us to finally confront and look at? What do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both, because it's an old problem, but we've been able to, I would say, with compensating controls, make it good enough. But what AI has just done is it's not, I would argue, water through a fire hose. Now it's a candy store where if you get through the front door, there are no glass cases. The candy's just everywhere, okay? And the business just sees the candy and just has to believe it's going to be good.
But, eat too much of it, you got a lot of cavities and a stomachache, right?
That's where we're going to go with this.
That's where we're going,
right?
exactly. Oh.
Be careful what you ask for.
I blew his metaphor for him. So, all right, let's bring on our sponsored guests. We've had him on their shows before. So thrilled to have him back again. The VP of Security over at Material Security, our wonderful sponsor. It is Rajan Kapoor. Rajan, thank you so much for joining us.
It is great to be back, David. Thanks for having me again.
How did we get here?
Nate Lee of TrustMind said, quote, "I don't think this is really an AI-specific problem. It's more about concentration of data, the lack of granularity in the controls, and the lack of oversight into how that data is being accessed. The problem exists regardless of AI, but AI is supercharging how much data people want to share." Your metaphor in the candy store, Steve. Supercharging how much data people want to share and how quickly they want to share it. This compounds with the fact that in many cases, the business value of sharing is high enough that companies are often willing to overlook and or understate the risk, end quote. And I also want to add Tim Shelton's quote here. He's from Hawk Network Defense. And he says, "Most environments already have too many stale permissions, shared mailboxes, overprivileged accounts, old files nobody remembers, and OAuth relationships that were approved once and never looked at again. The AI itself is not really the problem. It's the fact that organizations are about to give automated systems access to data environments they barely govern today. Once an agent can search, summarize, correlate, and act on that data at scale, all the old, quote, low priority exposure problems suddenly matter a lot more, end quote." These two quotes are pretty much spelling out what you said at the beginning. These two quotes are a great example of how nasty this problem is. Yes, Steve?
So what I like about these two quotes, and we'll go back to the candy store, is historically, we've got adults after 30 years in cybersecurity. And so we know the candy store is there, but our appetite for candy, we moderated. We have some self-control. AI agents are like 11-year-olds, and they are just going to eat that candy because it's just their eyes are big as saucers. Okay. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here is, while we were okay, now we've got this new generation of kind of child AI coming in, and all of the ills of the past are going to come back because I won't say we got lazy, but we kind of all agreed on what was good enough. And that is not going to cut it anymore.
All right, Rajat, I throw this to you. Have Nate and Tim here really outlined the problem well? I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, sure, there's more to it, but this just shows that this problem's been compounded and we've been just sitting on it thinking that it's not a problem, which in a sense it wasn't as bad as it is right now. What do you think?
They hit the nail on the head with those quotes. I agree completely. And I don't have a candy store equivalent metaphor here, so I'll just speak. I think that the cloud office environments, Office 365, Google Workspace, have been long neglected and just underappreciated as what they are, which is like vast troves of information where your company does their business, right? Like it's how you talk to customers, it's how you talk to partners and vendors, it's how you communicate internally. It's, and it's all this unstructured data just sitting there. And quite frankly, as an industry, we were able to ignore that for a while, right? Because like, okay, it's my employees who are in there, but now these agents coming in and being OAuth, the lines have shifted, right? They've shifted over to these accounts now because every CEO wants their business to run faster, right? With AI. You can't say no to AI as a security professional right now. And that means turning on agent access to email. What's in your mailbox? Turning agent access on to files. What's in your drive? So this goes to the past coming back to haunt us. That's what this is.
There must be a better solution.
Ashish Popley of DefenderMate said, quote, "What has to change is the architecture, not the rollout pace. Two paths to fix it. First, constrain the agent. So you narrow the scope, you fix the logic, predictable service, and safe today, this whole thing is safe. It gives up, though, most of the productivity story. But the second option is build agents their own identity layer. Treat the agents as a new principal class, not a user, not a deterministic service." And Daniel Gorecki, a CISO over at NGC Risk, said, quote, "OAuth is a connectional protocol, not an authorization framework. The control surface has to move to the data layer, classification, tagging, scope data products, not the access layer anymore. We're going to need to redesign ACLs, the access control lists, for how agents actually consume data, not bolt them onto legacy permission models." This, by the way, Rajan, like what Daniel says here, this is classic problem in technology. The technology rolls out with little to no security attached, and now we're slapping security on top of it, which is far from an ideal situation.
That's right. And while I appreciate, the quotes there and what they're saying, we don't have time right now to say, let's slow down and rebuild the authentication layer. Let's slow down and figure out how to give agents limited access. What are the levers that we have today? OAuth. OAuth is the only thing that we have that are going to connect these agents into these accounts. And that one quote was extremely spot on. It is not designed for least privilege use. Like OAuth is just designed to securely connect services together, right? And so what levers do we have today? You've got to get control of that data, right? You have to wrap your arms around it so that the agents just can't get access to things that it shouldn't. And I'm excited for if we ever develop OAuth 3.0 and it actually has these controls in it, right? I'll give you a great example. We use Ramp at Material. Love them. They're great for expense management. I do want to give the Ramp agent access to my mailbox, but only to look at emails that I've labeled as receipts, right? That's all I wanted to look at. However, that's not an option. I can only give that app full access to my mailbox or no access. And so really just getting control of what's in my mailbox is my only option, right? I do think we need to start re-architecting how we are connecting these things up. We just don't have a ton of time right now.
All right, very good point. All right, so Steve, your thoughts on this? I mean, I think we agree that this is happening. It's like, I think we're all just kind of waiting for the day this onslaught starts happening. Where are we in the cycle, I guess is my question.
So we are challenging ourselves to invent a new way of understanding how you can access this data. And I would argue we have authentication that we talked about, but that's OAuth. We have authorization, role-based access controls. But what we need to do is now talk about what I've heard somebody actually talk about with is authorship authentication, which is who is the author of this? And then based on that, who can see it? So it's almost like a new concept that we're trying to understand this, right? And I go, it's still early because we're still trying to understand what it is that we want to do with these digital identities and AI to be able to do it in a controlled fashion. And I think a lot of this, honestly, is us now working through what that concept is, okay? And how does that make sense? And another analogy I say is, hey, how many of us have moved 3 or 4 times in our lifetime? Every time we move, we have 15 boxes that we never open. We put them all in the basement.
Oh, by the way, I have some of those in my garage right now.
Okay.
I moved 5 years ago.
Yes. And then the grandkids come over, okay, and they're like, oh, let's learn about grandma and grandpa, and we're going to tear through all of those boxes and just see what's there, and they're going to come out. And we're like, nope, we need to do something a little bit about the boxes for what they can get into because we don't know what's in there. And so how do we now try to resurrect what that looks like? Don't know yet. Still figuring that out.
For the last few decades, email security has meant bolting a gateway on and hoping it caught everything coming in. We alluded to this in the last segment. But today's CISOs know that's not enough. The threats aren't just coming through the front door anymore. They're living in your drive, your third-party OAuth grants, and your historical mailboxes. Pure play email security charges a premium solely to guard the perimeter. If you want to protect files, monitor risky OAuth access, or monitor account takeovers, it's another product, another portal, another contract, another headache. Material Security takes a different approach. They built a platform that treats your cloud workspace as a single unit. They secure the email, the files, and the accounts, not as separate silos, but as the connected ecosystem they are. The best part? It actually costs less than that legacy gateway you're currently paying for. One price for everything. No hidden extras for data discovery or identity protection. It's security that works at a price that makes sense. So stop paying for a gateway and start protecting the workspace. You can see how at their website, material.security, and it is spelled exactly the way it sounds, the word material.security. And when you go and you learn more about them, let them know you heard about them from the CISO series.
I didn't think of these options.
Steve Tout of Identiant said, quote, employers have access to this data, but access is not legitimacy. Will employees trust agents crawling years of inboxes in the name of productivity? That's a big one. This is where digital twins matter, not as another agent rummaging through the enterprise, but as a proxy for humans, a governed representation of interests, context, permissions, and boundaries, something that stands between people and enterprise data to determine what gets shared or withheld. For AI to be human-centered, humans need representation in the architecture. End quote. This is a really good point. Tony Gonzalez of Intervision Services said, quote, the issue is still balancing the hoard versus purge equation when it comes to data retention. AI may push people to keep as much data as they can, hoping it becomes purposeful. Oh, yes, that's why it sticks around. But the perils of keeping too much are clear. Expands the risk potential for data exposure, and risk of breach, drives up storage costs, and increases complexity of data management and data privacy administration. The major underlying problem is authorization. Just because we have the data doesn't mean it should be shared with all models and agents. These two quotes are really on the money here. And they speak to something we've talked about before. It is really cheap to hold on to data. Here's what I'm blaming storage vendors. If they made everything more expensive, maybe we wouldn't be wanting to save all our data so cheaply. So we can blame the storage vendors. Should we do that, Steve?
I would say human nature, for whatever reason, is we're hoarders. And because of that, we hoard. And so all of this data, now that it's cheap, same thing. We go, why get rid of it if it isn't expensive? Because it could someday be interesting. That's what we're hearing is a recurring theme. And so therefore we save it because it might be valuable. Just like our houses, which is when are you going to purge the stuff and realize I am never going to use that ever again because the disco days are over and that hat's gone. We can't do it. And where Steve Tout is so interesting here, which was great. But now that AI, a digital twin, as a concept we never had before is going to rummage through this. Authentication and authorization isn't sufficient, right? It's like, what does that mean to give AI access to human-generated data and how to represent that? And I think that's where we're struggling. And in the meantime, brilliant at the basics. We're just saying do data classification, do the right data access, do the right role-based access controls, because it's the best that we have. And this gets to where we are right now, which is we can't say no to the business. But man, oh man, let's hope that those kids don't get too bad of a bellyache, because a few of them are going to go to the hospital.
Rajan, I don't need a metaphor from you, but this is what I need. What I need is, give me an example, because I bet you've seen this. I want people to get a sort of a real world example of this data exposure problem. The most obvious is like email. People don't comprehend how much they have just sitting in their darn email. Give me an example of this data exposure problem that it cannot be solved by simple authorization.
We see this at Material multiple times a week. As soon as we connect into a customer environment, we will do like a 3-month scan of like all the information in your employees' mailboxes, all the information in your employees' files. And we're looking for things like healthcare records, credit card numbers. We're looking for customer information, proprietary information. And we get a hit on everything, especially if you're at a healthcare company or a bank or somewhere that's in a regulated industry, that you're basically attesting this data does not exist outside systems it's supposed to be in. We find it, right? And that's because humans, they want the path of least resistance, right? And so if they're trying to get something to someone and they're fighting the tools that they're using, they're just going to go right to email, right? They're just like, I'll just email it to you. And the in-transit controls just aren't enough to make sure the stuff doesn't end up at rest in your accounts. And retention was brought up, right, as like a lever, right? But retention is like a legal lever. That's limiting the exposure of your data that can be like discovered as part of discovery in like a court case, right? It's not really a security lever, because like in the data that's left, you still might have some really sensitive stuff in there, right? If you have a 2-year retention policy, so the last 2 years of stuff is probably pretty valuable, right? And so, so we see this like all the time in our first conversations after we've done the analysis, and we sit down and it's almost like a game show. Guess what's behind mailbox number 1, and it never gets old, like watching the reaction of the security team.
Here's the thing. Everyone is rightfully horrified when they discover this kind of stuff. Like, what? And understandable. My question is, first, classification has to happen so, that stuff doesn't get exposed anymore, which is critical. Because once you can classify data, there's just a world of things you can do with it, and much of it being security. But I'm interested to know, do you start to have that retention conversation like, we should expunge this data after 2 years or whatever that time period is? And how do you walk them through that really uncomfortable discussion? Because that is pretty uncomfortable.
That's a great question. Surprisingly, it makes retention less necessary.
If you classify it all.
If you classify it, then you can kind of surgically remove the data that you don't want in the mailbox, right? Either immediately or after a certain period of time. And now you know that the data that's left behind, you really don't care about, and like let the agents have at it, right? Like bringing it back to what we're talking about, just let the agents have at it, because customer data is not going to be in there. Healthcare information is not going to be there.
So you don't have to have that data retention question if you can surgically remove the issues.
Yeah, that gets popped over to the general counsel. Like, how long do you want this data to sit around? Then becomes a purely legal question.
Steve, have you had that uncomfortable conversation about losing data? Or does it, like what Rajan says, you do your part and go, look, I'm throwing this to legal. It's their decision?
So retention policies are one of those things that I would say historically security never really cared about. Confidentiality, availability, integrity. But as we've started to approach this, we're realizing those retention policies are actually important for us because, like we said, everybody wants to hoard. And we're just simply saying we have to reduce our risk posture. We have to reduce our protective perimeter here. And so we're starting to advocate for what are the retention policies and can we implement them? Because that is now an important tool in our toolbox. So I had these conversations multiple times. And, it was funny because legal would go, yeah, there's a retention policy and it's 24 months. And I would say, well, can you please now purge it? And then you'd go to the CIO and you'd say, can you flush all that out? Because that's the policy. reduce my perimeter. And then the business goes, no, 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 no. We want to keep that stuff because we don't know if it might be interesting later. You go, there you go. Okay, there's the friction.
Steve, I would counter that with in security, we used retention policies as a hammer, right? What we were responding to was the inability to say what exactly is in this set of data and what are we concerned about inside there. And so we're just like, well, let's just get rid of all of it because we don't have like visibility into what's there.
Do you find that you're working with companies that they have no means to get rid of data? Like they don't even know how to do it? Have you run into that problem?
Yeah, we've seen that. We've also seen like where the political environment just is one where like the CEO or the executive team's like, no, you're not going to get rid of this data. We are going to keep this around, right? Because you're touching their data in their minds, right? This is their data. How dare you, right?
So I have one just quick example. I had signed up for some service to rent something and somehow I got just a one-time use of the service. I got a horrific review and I'm just like, well, I can't be up on this service with this awful review. It's awful. And so this was just when the right to be forgotten had reared its head. And so I said, I want you to expunge me from your database. The number of emails, it was clear from when I made this request and I had to send them a link to the right to be forgotten request that they had never done this before and how difficult it was for them to delete. It literally was a dozen emails before I got off of the service. So my feeling is some companies just might not be able to do it at all.
I think on the cloud office side, there are a good number of tools to like purge data because Microsoft and Google control that. When you get into like production environments, for sure, companies are struggling. I mean, it's a broader question. So let's say they managed to delete your data from their production environment. Did anyone make sure your data is now deleted from their Office 365 or Google Workspace environment? You know, did those two sides of the house talk to each other? Or are they still in violation of the right to be forgotten spirit and you still have data in like their cloud office environment?
It's very possible. It's sitting there somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's insidious, right? Because it's ephemeral, but it's being duplicated all over because it's important now to be able to duplicate it. Let an AI agent see it, so copy a subset out. So we're having this problem about the insidious nature of the duplication of all this data because we fundamentally use our replies or our deleted areas kind of a big old filing cabinet rather than taking the rigor that we have to be able to know what we really need to keep.
Coming up next, you can block 10,000 bad indicators and still let the same attacker walk right back in.
This threat intelligence tip is sponsored by Malanta.
Most programs pour their effort into granular indicators, things like file hashes, IP addresses, domains. The trouble is, those are the cheapest things for an adversary to change. Burn their infrastructure today, and they stand up a new infrastructure tomorrow, running the exact same playbook. Security researcher David Bianco mapped this years ago in The Pyramid of Pain. Hashes and IPs sit at the bottom because they're trivial to swap, while tactics, techniques, and procedures, well, they sit at the top because changing how you operate is genuinely painful for an attacker. Now, the idea is to push detection toward better behaviors, those tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, of the adversaries actually targeting your sector. So CISA publishes guidance on mapping adversary behavior to MITRE ATT&CK for exactly this purpose. But this isn't a panacea. Teams turn their attack coverage map green based on tools they own, not detections they've tested. Prioritize the behaviors that matter. Then, continuously prove your detections actually fire. Green on a heat map isn't a control. A test that passes is.
To stay ahead of AI-powered attackers and prevent attacks at the staging phase, head to Malanta.ai. Pre-attack intelligence. Nothing will happen until we take action.
Aaron Stanley of DBT Labs said, quote, "It's a problem, but not a new one. Security and legal teams have spent years balancing data hoarding against the risk of discovery and exposure. I don't love saying it, but, quote, the only way to stop a bad AI is a good AI is sounding less like a billboard slogan and more like a legitimate strategy. My hope is that we can finally use AI to continuously interrogate our data to find latent risk, identify what no longer has business value, and drive aggressive data minimization strategies. And Daniel Gorecki, CISO of NGC Risk, said, quote, data has a half-life, but we have typically failed at enforcing it properly. AI creates the forcing function we've been deferring around properly executed data retention. Before any agent gets access, the first question is, should this data still exist at all? Retention enforcement isn't a pre-deployment nice to have anymore. It needs to be the prerequisite. This is just reinforcing what we were just saying. But you're saying, Rajan, with material is that if you just know where the offending problems are and you can just pull them out or build walls around them, however you do it, and you can explain, then this actually doesn't become such a big problem, does it?
It minimizes the footprint, right, of this problem and the surface area. But Aaron's point is a good one, right? AI is coming into our environments, but it's also equally a risk as much as it's a tool that we as security teams can use to start wrapping our own arms around this problem. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. All of these apps and AI agents are being locked into an environment. Well, how about turning an AI agent towards these apps and interrogating them, looking at their website, looking at their privacy policy, looking at their terms of service, and determining, is this an app I even want in my environment? That's something that we at Material do. Like, we're using agents to go and do those workflows to basically say, well, do we want this thing even coming in the front door to begin with before we worry about the data that it'll have access to once it comes in? So I think Aaron is like spot on there. Like, let's start thinking about this from a defender mindset and how can we leverage agents to help us do our work faster and with better fidelity.
All right. I throw this to you, Steve. Is there a world where you keep data forever, but you intelligently know what is sensitive and what is not sensitive? And would you feel comfortable operating in that world?
As a security practitioner, that's solving world hunger.
Okay, so I've created too big of a,
I'm like,
a nirvana.
This is DLP and CSPM and everything we've been trying to do for 35 years, right? But on the other hand, I would totally, from a business perspective, keep the data forever. Because if the business is happy with me and it makes them feel like they're selling more jeans, then as long as we can manage the risk, that's great. And that's why I go, there really is two sides to that, which is, are you the CISO that's here to secure the company from attack? Or are you the CISO that's enabling the business? And depending upon where you fall on that continuum as to how you see whether data is good or bad. But I really like what Aaron said, which was, okay, so let's use AI to be that parent that's reminding you, hey, do you really need this? Do you really need that? Clean your room. Let's get rid of this, okay? And so this low annoyance factor, friction, to be able to get everybody to actually do overall a better job. I'm like, I really like that idea. I think there's really value there to be able to remind you to kind of clean house, and it can help you do that cleaning of house, right? It is your assistant, and that's really a cool idea.
All right, Rajan, I'm going to ask you actually to give us a little details of how Material does this, because this is the way I envision it. Tell me if I'm on target here, but you're working in Office 365 or in Google Workspace. That's the two areas you operate in. And the idea is you determine what these security concerns are. You have policies around it, and you are tagging the stuff and sort of limiting them appropriately as it's being generated, because it's constantly being generated in the environment. Am I sort of describing this appropriately?
Yeah, we basically are trying to solve world hunger at Material.
There you go.
So our point is that these environments are interconnected, right? And the way that people have typically tried to wrap their arms around them has been to go and buy like spot solutions, CSPM, DLP, inbound email threat detection, things like that. But like to really defend these environments and to really understand them, you need a holistic view of what's happening. You need to be able to pull up one account and look at that account and say, this account has 100 sensitive files in their My Drive. This account has access to 500 more sensitive files in their shared drives. This account has 300 sensitive emails in their mailbox. This is how they're accessing it. This is how they're using it. These are the apps that they've OAuth'd into their account, right, to go and touch that data. And this is the actual data that's being touched, right? And then putting controls on top of that to pull that stuff out, right? Like, well, I don't want this agent having access to healthcare. In fact, I don't even want it to be in Drive. Let's get it out of there, right? And so we really are trying to take a much more holistic view of it comes down to what is happening with this identity that is a person inside my environment and how do we protect them?
All right. Well, that brings us to the point of the show where I'm going to ask both of you which quote was your favorite and why. And I'm going to start with you, Rajan. Which quote was your favorite and why?
I'm going to go with Daniel Gorecki over at NGC Risk. The earlier one that he had, OAuth is a connection protocol and not an authorization framework. The control surface has to move to the data layer, classification, tagging, scope data products, not the access layer anymore. We're going to need to redesign ACLs for how agents actually consume data, not bolt them onto legacy permission models. I think that's spot on.
Very, very good. Yes, I know that was right on the money for you. So I ask you, Steve Zalewski, which quote was your favorite and why?
It's a tough one this week. There are so many good ones, but I am going to go with Steve Tout from Identiant, where it says, we now have digital twins. So we don't need another agent rummaging through the enterprise, but we need a proxy for the human to understand what it should see. And I think that really is beyond kind of today's problem, what we're trying to understand, right? Which was, what does that proxy look like and how do we understand what to do? And in the meantime, we've got to really double down on classification.
Well, that brings us to the very end of the show. I want to thank our guest, Rajan Kapoor, VP Security of Material Security. I'm going to let you have the very last word. And I want to thank Mr. Steve Zalewski, my co-host, and the wonderful Material Security, our sponsor for today's episode. Detection and response for the cloud workspace is here. Remember, if you're in Office 365 or Google Workspace, which is most of us for that matter, you should be taking a look at what they're doing over there at Material Security. Remember, the web address is material.security. And Rajan, any last words, any pitch for Material Security, and are you hiring over there?
Yeah, so we are hiring. We have a number of roles across engineering, security, and our go-to-market team. So come check us out. It's a great place to work. I love it. And yeah, last words. We've ignored the Cloud Office Suite for a long, long time. And it's now time to start worrying about it, wrap your arms around it, and make sure you're thinking about this from the holistic architecture standpoint. Come check us out at Material Security.
All right. And I'm assuming they can connect with you directly about Material Security, or if they're interested in positions, assuming they look at your job board. You have a job board, yes?
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. Come find me on LinkedIn or find me on the Material Security website. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone to talk about anything.
We will have a link to your LinkedIn profile on the blog post for this very episode. Thank you very much, Rajan. Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you to Material Security as well. And to our audience, we greatly appreciate your contributions and for listening to Defense in Depth.
We've reached the end of Defense in Depth. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss yet another hot topic in cybersecurity. This show thrives on your contributions. Please write a review, leave a comment on LinkedIn or on our site, CISOseries.com, where you'll also see plenty of ways to participate, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to Defense in Depth.